Conspiracy theory. When you hear these words, I imagine a mix of things rushes to mind. The eye of providence, shady men in trench coats, suits, and fedoras, staged government coups, political assassinations, tinfoil hats. You may hearken back to a time without the internet, when conspiracy theories were more difficult to disprove and debunk. A time when strange lights in the sky were not easily explained away by experimental aircraft or a teen piloting a drone. The story I am about to tell you is from such a time, at the end of a decade that had been consumed by suspicion and nuclear threats. This is the story of the Phobos Incident. The 1980s were a time of rapid and booming growth all over the world, signaling the end of the decades-long Cold War that had vexed the US and Russia. Pitting one country against the other as enemies and rivals, the Cold War had ultimately assured that both were too occupied to achieve their full potential as nations. Now that the war was over, however, the US and Russia entered a renaissance of sorts, especially within their respective space programs. The Russian space agency started work on a new pair of unmanned space probes using a new design, one that would replace their older models, which had seen use in the interplanetary missions since 1975. These new probes were called Phobos 1 and Phobos 2, as they were created to be sent into Mars' orbit and interact with Mars' moon, Phobos, and they were highly technologically advanced for their time. Among many sensors and instruments aboard Phobos 1 and 2 were X-ray and gamma-ray spectrometers, magnetometers and magnetic susceptibility sensors, temperature sensors, tiltometers, seismometers, radiation detectors, a DAS lander, and the VST-TV imaging system that would eventually broadcast one of the most perplexing and incredible images ever to be observed by a spacecraft. The DAS lander was a module that was to launch two landers, a stationary platform and a mobile hopper, from the main probe onto the surface of Phobos permanently, after the orbital objectives of the main probes were complete. The two landers would stay on the surface of Phobos and observe both the Moon and Mars until they were lost to space debris or mechanical failure. Considering the sensors and experimental equipment aboard the landers, this could have been a monumental opportunity to study the Red Planet and its subsequent satellites, providing Earth with atmospheric, seismographic, spectroscopic, and image data for years to come. However, Phobos 1 and 2 never completed their long-term objectives. Phobos 1 was lost early in the mission due to a radio telecommunications error. However, Phobos 2 was lost under more mysterious circumstances. Suffice to say, the Phobos program was one of international interest. Phobos 1 and 2 were the culmination of the effort of Russia and 14 other nations, the United States, France, and West Germany among them. This type of cooperation was a sign to the masses. People were no longer looking up into the sky in fear of rockets carrying nuclear oblivion. Instead, curiosity and awe once again turned their eyes to the stars. Though the days of walking on the moon had seemingly passed, the last half of the 1980s saw many a cosmic spectacle. Phobos was no exception. In July of 1988, Phobos 1 and 2 were launched. The journey to Mars was going to take 6 months. Phobos 1 was lost after the first month of the journey, but Phobos 2 continued on into the stars. Error disables Soviet probe, but second craft on course for Mars, 1988. Both probes, now millions of miles from Earth, are scheduled to arrive at Mars in January. They were to study Mars first and then move on to Phobos, a small Martian moon. A wrong command punched into a computer by a ground controller caused Phobos 1 to lose its lock on the sun. As a result, its solar panels turned toward the cold darkness of space and could no longer convert the sun's radiation into electricity. The probe subsequently lost power and died. The second probe is set to send a lander to the moon's surface on May 25th. As Phobos 2 continued on its now more lonely journey toward the orbit of the Red Planet, the public on Earth dreamt out loud about the eventual manned spaceflight to Mars. Soviet-led mission, A Step Toward Manned Mars Flight, reads the title of a Chicago Tribune article from 1988. The article told of a Moscow summit meeting shortly before the launch of Phobos 1 and 2, and of talks between Reagan and Gorbachev on launching a joint effort manned space mission to Mars. Clearly the times had changed, and world cooperation was expanding humanity's goals in space. Then, in January 1989, Phobos 2 entered Mars orbit. The planet of Mars has acquired one more satellite. A Moscow news report from January 29, 1989 reads, "It continues to say that the mission will bring mankind closer to unraveling the mysteries of the planet." And for a short time, it did. Phobos 2 gathered data on the Sun, space, Mars, and Phobos, and returned a total of 37 images of Phobos and Mars that are still incredible to look at today. However, on March 1st, a photo was released, transmitted by Phobos 2, that caused unrest. When these optical and infrared images of Hydraeades chaos were received, the team was unsure as to what they were seeing. Curious shapes littered the surface, observed by the optical imaging cameras aboard Phobos 2. More curious, however, were the infrared signatures, which seemed to suggest something strange. Many agreed that the infrared signatures bore resemblance to those found in cities on Earth. However, they appeared to be generated beneath the surface of Mars. The city-like pattern is 60 kilometers wide and could be easily mistaken for an aerial view of Los Angeles. Dr. John Becklake of the London Science Museum said of the inexplicable infrared signature, "The images were certainly unsettling, something that was only compounded upon by the fact that Phobos 2 didn't transmit any more images until 24 days later. By this time, Phobos 2 had synced into roughly the same orbit as Phobos and Deimos, and continued to return images of the surface of Mars. People waited for the probe to send more images, and hopefully gain some clarity in light of recent developments. The next images to be released, however, did not clarify the situation, and were even more mysterious. Commonly, these images are referred to as shadows. These images seem to show large shadows on the surface of Mars. They are observable in both optical and infrared, and you can observe features of Mars through them. The shadow has an iconic shape, which stretches close to 300 kilometers across the Martian surface. These shadow images generated so many more questions, but they would be the last images to be released from the Phobos program for a period of about 3 years, because on March 28, 1989, Phobos 2 failed. There were whispers that it had detected something strange just before going completely silent. March 31, 1989, headlines from Moscow stated that Phobos 2 captured strange photos of Mars before losing contact with its base. Speculation ran wild as whispers from the scientific community told of an alien vessel over 20 kilometers long. Skeptics turned their noses up and dismissed these claims as hearsay, no matter how many scientists came out to describe the images, which were not yet made public. However, in December of 1991, Marina Popovich, an Air Force colonel involved in the RSA, held a press conference at the Russian consulate in San Francisco. There, she would reveal to the world the final image taken by Phobos 2 before its failure 3 years earlier. What Marina would reveal would shake the public. To many, it is still the most damning evidence supporting intelligent life outside of Earth. The world looked on with slack jaws when she held up this still depicting Phobos and something in the foreground, something that shouldn't have been there. It was a very long, flat shape, measured to be over 20 kilometers long, and it appeared to be some sort of craft. The final image taken by Phobos 2 was confirmed by several optical cameras and the infrared camera. It was not an error. It was not an image artifact. What you were seeing, Marina described to be an unidentified flying object approaching Phobos 2. The timing of this image suggested that whatever this UFO was, it may have somehow shut down or destroyed the remaining Phobos probe. In the coming months after the image of the mysterious craft was revealed, many scientists collaborated over the shadow images, now given shocking context as the final images from Phobos 2 revealed a possible source of the shadows. Through that collaborative effort, it was learned that the shadows had been moving as the images were taken. It would appear that Phobos 2 had seen its unidentified flying stalker's shadow just before its cameras turned to face the anomaly directly in the moments before the probe went dark. The deeper scientists looked into this incident, the less they could explain it without the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence. The number of photos, the fact that they were taken by 2 optical and 1 infrared cameras, and the fact that the shadows in the earlier images seemed to correspond to the vessel in the final image, all seemed to point to one chilling conclusion. In the late winter and early spring months of 1989, Phobos 2 was not alone in Mars orbit, and it would appear that we are not alone, either in the universe or even in our own solar system.